October 16th, 1944. The mountains and forests of Slovenia under Nazi occupation. 103 men hold their breath, pressed flat to the ground. Just 50 meters away, German soldiers and tracking dogs are combing the area. For 3 years, every escape attempt was crushed by Stalag 306, wiped out without a trace. But tonight, they vanished from the camp in silence, leaving nothing behind but a blank space on the roll call board. Ralph Church is at the front, clutching a crumpled sheet of paper. Contact points, patrol routines, the locations of partisan food caches buried underground. The details that might get 103 men across 160 kilometers of enemy territory and back to friendly lines. More than 100 make it out alive. Yet almost no one has ever heard the story. Why would a bank clerk refuse freedom to go back and save over 100 others? And how did he do the impossible? May 1941. The Greek coast. A retreat in ruins. The Germans dominate, tanks and air power. The Allies are exhausted, scattered. Ralph Church, a young bank teller from Adelaide, has been in uniform for only 8 months. Ralph isn't an assault trooper. He's a man who reads maps, who watches, calculates, thinks ahead. And yet, at the evacuation point, he misses the final boat. As the ship pulls away, he and 6 other Australians are left behind. There won't be another ship coming back. That sentence slams shut the last door of hope. And who could have guessed that an ordinary soldier like him would go on to lead the legendary escape, later known as Crow's Flight? 6 days later, Ralph is drifting along the coastline with that small group. The Greeks whisper that German motor launches are hunting, hide among civilians, and wait for a submarine. But Ralph has a wife. He doesn't want to be listed as missing, a future swallowed by uncertainty. He chooses the risk. In a flash of remembered life, he admits to himself, like a confession, "I just need to get home, no matter what." Picture it. You're facing the sea at night. No map, no engine. Salt water scraping your skin raw. Only a broken fishing boat. They patch it up. Then 2 weeks of rowing by night. And by day they crawl into shade and barely breathe. Nearly 100 kilometers. Every stroke is a promise. As long as we're alive, we can still go home. When they're only about 3 kilometers from Crete, the sea suddenly goes quiet. A German patrol vessel slides out like a blade, alarms screaming. In that instant, every route closes, guns leveled. The man with the map is no longer a soldier, only a prisoner. And Ralph's life drops into a different tunnel, darker, deeper, with no clear view of survival. When he's captured just off Crete, how will Ralph be ground down inside the German POW system? And how will he choose to survive when everything is stripped away? They cram the prisoners into cattle cars. 6 days, not enough water. No sanitation, no real place to sit. The stench of bodies, fear, and despair churns together like thick black mud. When someone dies, the body is dragged out and tossed onto the tracks like a sack. The train keeps moving. No stops. Here, a human being is worth less than livestock. Maribor appears like a steel clamp. Heavy security, SS everywhere. Constant searches. Every day is the same, except you never know whether you'll still be alive tomorrow. 6 o'clock. They're marched out to the work site. 12 hours of labor. Their job, repair railroad lines bombed by Allied aircraft. Every crater becomes another day of exhaustion. At night, the reward is about 200 grams of black bread, hard, bitter, so little you chew slowly just to trick yourself into believing you're still eating. Ralph sees a different kind of hell in the neighboring compound. Soviet prisoners are starved on purpose. Ukrainians are in there too. They shrink day by day, like something is being drained out of them. Not from bad luck, but because someone wants them dead. Ralph understands something terrifying. If he doesn't change how he lives, he will disappear the same way. This is survival at the edge. Either collapse like a shadow, or turn your mind into a knife. Red Cross parcels bring him back a little strength. Cigarettes, chocolate, soap, Small things, but they can be traded for life. Ralph builds a black market. He befriends Les Laws, a British soldier who played jazz piano before the war. At night, they put on little performances. Music can't break the fence, but it can keep the mind from cracking completely. Ralph's nickname is the Crow, a slur aimed at South Australians, mocked as being so poor they can only afford to eat crow. Bitter irony. The Crow learns how to live among the dead. In his head, one line keeps repeating like a private oath. I'm not going to wait to be released. But to escape, he has to understand the men who hold him. He has to speak their language. And Ralph begins walking the most dangerous road of all: adaptation. In the hell of Stalag 306, what will make Ralph realize that sheer toughness isn't enough? And who will be the first person to pull him back from the brink? At Stalag 306, muscles might get you through today. If you want to get through next month, you need something else: a mind. Ralph understands that sooner than most. He tries to escape, twice. Both attempts are stupid. The outcome is the same: 7 days in solitary in a lightless concrete cell, half rations of bread and water, and beatings you don't forget. The first time, he hides in a supply truck, holding his breath beneath sacks of potatoes. After nearly 2 kilometers, he's found. The second time, he crawls through the fence and makes it 5 kilometers into the woods before the dogs pick him up. If he tries again, he'll be sent to a punishment camp in Poland. So Ralph stops running. To travel far across enemy territory, you must speak the enemy's tongue. But in camp, learning German is dangerous. If you're exposed, you're suspected. And suspicion here means fists or worse. Ralph finds a dirty method that works. He bribes a farm boy who brings vegetables into the camp, cigarettes, chocolate, soap in exchange for German newspapers. Each paper is a fragment of the outside world. Ralph teaches the boy to recognize letters. The boy brings the papers in. Ralph devours every line, every structure, every new word, like he's swallowing oxygen. On long nights, he murmurs pronunciation into the darkness. Careful, steady, cold, like a man sharpening a blade. After only a few months, Ralph speaks well enough to be unsettling. The camp commandant needs an interpreter. Ralph is appointed interpreter to the commandant. The prisoners elect him their spokesman. In a place where everything is locked, a role is a key. With that position, Ralph gets occasional chances to go outside the wire on assignments. He studies roads, patrol schedules, guards' faces, the habits of civilian overseers. He also sees hunger used as a weapon. Soviet prisoners in the neighboring sector are starved to death, deliberately. Ralph doesn't forget. It becomes a moral marker in his mind. If he survives, he cannot survive meaninglessly. By 1943, Ralph has recorded and buried 47 men. The number itself is a warning. Every name is a reminder. Wait a little longer, and it will be your turn. And that's when Ralph begins to think differently. Escape is no longer a reckless leap. It's a project, a system. And to build a system, he needs access, information, trust. German has given him a position. Now he'll use that position like a knife held close to the prison's throat. Gentle pressure, but enough to be felt. When German becomes a weapon, how far up inside the camp will Ralph climb? Will that small power open the door to freedom, or to a deeper fall? 2 solo escapes teach Ralph the harshest lesson. Don't call it failure. Call it what it is: a foolish trial run by someone who hasn't yet understood the new battlefield. In occupied Yugoslavia, escaping alone is nearly suicide. You can get past the wire. You can't get past an entire landscape of checkpoints, informers, patrols, and people who profit from selling you out. The turning point comes at the end of 1943 with a new prisoner, Freddie Russell from New Zealand. Freddie doesn't just know how to escape. He knows how to live in the woods like a partisan. Which trails work, which signals are safe. And most important, Freddie knows of a secret airstrip where Allied aircraft can land at night to extract men. In an imagined moment of internal clarity, Ralph sums it up simply. To escape, we need contact first. We need a way home. We need someone to catch us. Not inspiration, logistics, trust. Ralph locks in the strategy. Before anyone runs, they must build a pipeline. A sealed chain of small segments linking the camp gate to partisan territory, and then to a place where a plane can take off. For 8 months, Ralph uses his interpreter role to move, listen, watch, and place bait in the right spots. He leaves coded messages at drop points. He finds forged documents, some say made by a blacksmith in Maribor. He locates a farmer about 10 kilometers south of the camp who can hide men. He uses a priest to pass information. He creates couriers in stages, so if one link breaks, the whole chain doesn't get exposed. That's how partisans survive, and Ralph learns fast. Then, on a night in late August 1944, Ralph decides to test the pipeline. He chooses 6 men. Freddie is among them. So is a British sergeant named Tom Price, plus 4 others. They cut the barbed wire with pliers smuggled in. They slip out. By dawn, they reach the first partisan checkpoint. And once he's free, Ralph does the thing that makes people resent him and respect him. He goes back. The partisans warn him. If he's recaptured, he could be shot. Ralph returns to Stalag 306 before sunrise anyway. He exploits a patrol gap around 3 o'clock, crawls back through the cut wire, and gets into his hut as if he never left. Why? Because he has seen the road, and he knows that one man escaping is only a rumor. But if an entire camp disappears, that is history. After that night, Ralph quietly selects the trustworthy, builds teams, sets pacing, prepares documents. Civilian clothes are smuggled in, piece by piece. A rough map is drawn from Freddie's knowledge. Partisan food caches are placed along the route. The pipeline is open. Now there's only one thing left. Open the valve. What does Freddie Russell bring that makes Ralph abandon the idea of escaping alone? And will the logistics and trust pipeline Ralph builds over 8 months really hold? After he returns, Ralph seems strangely calm. For 6 weeks, he does the kind of work no one films. He checks men, chooses men, rejects men, judging who can keep quiet, who will panic, who might trade your life for a piece of bread. He walks through the barracks like an experienced spokesman going about routine duties. But inside, he's building an assembly line, groups of roughly 12, a departure time assigned to each group, forged papers from the Maribor blacksmith, civilian clothing smuggled in piece by piece, a rough map based on Freddie's knowledge, and most important, partisan food caches set along the route. A pipeline has formed. If one link breaks, the whole system breaks. If the system breaks, people die. Ralph knows that, and he does it anyway. On October 10th, 1944, the first group escapes. No explosion, no gunfire. Just a group that vanishes from the roll call list. Then, 24 hours later, the next group. A steady rhythm like a clock. The Germans don't notice. Not yet. By October 13th, nearly 50 men have left the camp without the Germans realizing. Partly luck, but mostly because Ralph manipulates the roll call records. He writes them down as transferred, or hospitalized in town. Dead letters on paper become an invisibility cloak for the living. The irony is obvious. A system that cages people with paperwork is defeated by paperwork. But every machine eventually runs an audit. On October 15th, a German officer conducts a surprise inspection. This time the numbers don't match. About a quarter of the camp is gone. No explanation, no transfer orders, no hospital entries. Alarms sound. A manhunt begins. In that moment, every beautiful plan dies. Only reflexes and contingency remain. Ralph has an exit he's kept like a knife hidden up his sleeve. A drainage culvert beneath the eastern fence that empties into a stream bed. Dirty, narrow, but it is a door to life. That night, while the Germans focus their search to the west, Ralph leads the remaining 47 men to the culvert. They crawl in, Filthy water rises to their waists. The stench slaps them in the face. Some want to vomit, some shake from cold. No one is allowed to make a sound. One by one, sliding, waiting, pulling each other along. When the last man crawls out, Ralph doesn't shout freedom. He doesn't dare. He only counts by sight, by feel. A total of 103 prisoners have escaped Stalag 306. They are still in the middle of enemy territory. No vehicles, not enough weapons, not enough food for 100 men. Only forest, mountains, and partisans to lead the way. And if his pipeline is real, it will take them to an airstrip inside partisan-held ground, where Dakota aircraft can land at night. If it's wrong, then Stalag 306 won't need to waste a single extra bullet. Will Ralph guide more than 100 men along a lifeline, or turn it into a trap that buries them all? On October 16, 1944, the breakout is complete, but freedom is not. 103 men enter the Slovenian mountains and forests like a column carrying its own breath. They are not allowed to talk, not allowed to smoke. They hide by day and move by night. A single cough could be a death whistle. The route to the airstrip isn't a straight line on a map. It's a 160-kilometer maze. They split into columns of about 20, each guided by partisans. Their clothing is patchwork, almost comical if this weren't war. Scavenged civilian jackets, German uniforms worn inside out, wraps torn from ragged blankets. Food is so scarce it feels like a cruel joke. Moldy hard bread, raw potatoes, a few tins of meat meant to feed 100 men for 2 weeks. The first 3 days go well. Then the Alps drop a snowstorm on them. Temperatures fall below 0 degrees Celsius. Wind cuts like knives. At night, the ground turns to stone. Exhausted men begin to stagger. There are only 2 choices: carry each other or leave people behind. A British sergeant suffers severe frostbite and wants to stop. Ralph refuses. He organizes a rotation to carry him. When one man collapses, another takes his place. They carry him for 16 kilometers. No one brags. No one gets sentimental. They do it because if you abandon one man today, abandoning the second becomes easier tomorrow. On October 22nd, cold and hunger claim a life. New Zealand Private Arthur Simmons' heart stops. There's no time to bury him, no ritual. The column keeps moving, leaving behind a body and a gap in formation. And they still have to avoid the Germans. At one point, the patrol passes within 50 meters. 50 meters close enough in normal life to hear voices. But that night they lie crushed into the ground, faces in wet leaves, listening to German boots scrape by. If one man sneezes, it ends. They cross the Pohorje range, one climb after another. Feet that once wore work boots now take rock, ice, roots. Many walk in silence, eyes down, not because of fear of heights, but because looking up would reveal how much is left and the spirit would crack. On October 28th, they reach the swollen Sava River. The bridge is guarded. They can't cross. The partisans lead them 3 kilometers upstream to find a shallower point. But shallow during flood season can still kill. 12 volunteers go first. They lock arms into a human chain, a living anchor against the current. Then groups of 8 cling to them and cross in turn. 4 hours, water cold as needles. Some men reach the far bank with legs numb and have to be carried. Someone might ask, how didn't they give up? The answer isn't pretty, because they weren't allowed to. Behind them were guns. Ahead was cold. Between the two, the only thing left was to walk. On the way to the airstrip, 2 more deaths fall like stones. David Finch, a British corporal, slips off a cliff path in the dark. No time to shout. One dry sound, then silence. No one dares turn on a light. No one dares call out. They keep moving, carrying the truth that darkness can kill too. On the last night, Australian Private George Murray dies of pneumonia. Not a heroic death, just lungs that can't endure any longer. Breath thins, fades, and the column moves on. On November 1st, 1944, they arrive. An airstrip in partisan-controlled territory. Not an airport, as you imagine, just a strip of earth scraped flat, enough for an old plane to land at night. 5 Dakotas are waiting. Ralph counts heads, counts for a long time. 3 dead, 100 alive, out of the 103 who escaped Stalag 306. As they prepare to board, 3 men decide to stay and fight with the partisans. Those who understand war also understand this might be another kind of escape. From the shame of going home, while the people who saved you remain in the forest to die. The Dakotas take off at 2:30 a.m., fly over the Adriatic Sea, and about 4 hours later land in Bari, Italy. When the wheels touch down, many men don't cheer. They just sit, stunned, because there are moments when the body hasn't yet caught up with what happened. The moment Ralph steps off, he is taken for interrogation. British intelligence holds him for 3 days, not to doubt his achievement, but to protect the pipeline still in operation. They require him to sign a secrecy agreement. The reason is blunt. If the method and route are exposed, the network will be destroyed, and the partisans and their families could be dragged away and shot. And Ralph signs. In November 1944, he returns to Adelaide after 4 years. His wife, Ronte, doesn't recognize him at first. Ralph weighs only 58 kilograms, about 40 kilograms less than when he left. Hair gone gray at the temples. He stands there like a man back from hell, yet forbidden to describe what hell looked like. He receives an Order of the British Empire in a small ceremony. No press, no photographs, no long applause, a brief congratulations, then everything is pushed into a drawer. After the war, Ralph returns to banking, then moves into insurance. When people ask, he says only that he had been a prisoner of war, nothing more. Because secrecy isn't only ink on paper, it becomes a habit of silence. Ralph stays silent for 40 years. In 1985, the secrecy order is lifted. By then, he is old, 72. And for the first time, he can speak, write, name the people who pulled him across rivers, hid him in their homes, guided him past checkpoints. He titles his story in the simplest way. 100 miles as the crow flies. 100 miles by crow's flight. It sounds light, but you and I both know. No bird flies through World War II without being shot at. Imagine this one last time. An operation that saved more than 100 men, supported by partisans, the SOE and MI9, kept secret not because it failed, but because it was too dangerous to publicize. Every boast could kill the people left behind. Every newspaper page could shatter the network. That was the price of 100 lives. And that is why history is sometimes silent, not because there's nothing to tell, but because some stories, told at the wrong time, would turn a hero into the man who unknowingly signed the death warrant of those who saved him. People like to think of escape as muscle, nerve, and one desperate sprint into the night. But this story is a reminder that what carries human beings out of prison is sometimes discipline and the ability to see beyond one's own fear. Ralph didn't win because he was stronger than the guards. He won because he was willing to learn. He learned the enemy's language not to surrender, but to hear what they said when they thought no one understood. He used paperwork, routines, and bureaucratic complacency, turning them into gaps. And once the gap existed, he didn't jump through alone. He went back. That was the hardest part. Not crawling under barbed wire, but forcing himself not to be selfish, when selfishness is the most natural reflex for survival. And there is one last thing worth keeping, like a long breath. Some victories are not told immediately, not because they aren't great enough, but because telling them could kill people who are still alive. In this case, silence isn't cowardice, it is protection.